Hey, everybody, welcome back to Searching for Political Identity. My name is Brian Escow, and I'm your host. It's a pleasure to be with you as always. My guest today really should need no introduction if you're listening to a podcast called Searching for Political Identity, but I'll give him a very quick intro anyway. His name is Brandon Straka of the Walkaway Movement. Now, any podcast host in the political space would be lucky to have Brandon as a guest because he's very famous. He's very high profile. He's got a lot of followers. He's been well known for many years now. But I am particularly lucky because in some ways I'm really following his footsteps. He was the original, literally, walk away from the left guy. He has done it at a scale that no one else has touched and no one will touch. So what were the highs of his journey? First of all, why did he go on the journey? What were the highs? What were the lows? And what advice does he have for me as someone who's following in his footsteps? That was the theme of our conversation. I'm so grateful that he joined me and so glad to be able to bring this conversation to you. I hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Brandon Straka. Hey, Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, people say that, well, I like to think that I'm following Kennedy's footsteps since moving to Trump after his endorsement, but really I'm following your footsteps. 6 years ago, you are the man of walkaway fame. So looking forward to getting your story. I mean, I know your story, and partially I hate to ask you to regurgitate it because all we need to do is watch your famous videos or watch some of the podcast interviews you've done. In fact, I saw you on Brett Weinstein just the other day. How was that experience, by the way, doing Brett?
Oh, it was really good. And it was interesting because Brett is actually what happened to him at Evergreen College, which, for anybody who doesn't know, and I don't know how old that story is now, 8 to 10 years probably. But he was a professor at Evergreen College in Washington State, a very, very liberal campus. And at this campus, they had like a yearly opt-out day if you're a white person, and it was one of these days that it's supposed to sort of like highlight some sort of social issue or whatever. But on this one particular year, they decided to do a mandatory opt-out day for white people. So essentially, if you're white, you're not allowed to come to class, and if you do come to class, it's apparently you're making some sort of statement that you don't support racism, whatever. So Brett was a professor who spoke out and said, like, look, you guys, I support, what you're doing with this, trying to draw awareness to the situation. But they're like, he said, you can't tell people that they cannot come to school based on the color of their skin. And the students essentially held him hostage in a room for like 24 hours, maybe longer. And then he ended up, I don't know if he got fired or was forced to resign for that position. And that was one of the stories that really started to wake me up to what the left had become. And so then I started Walkaway. And after I started Walkaway, throughout the years, he actually has had some sort of, kind of disparaging things to say about Walkaway based off of misunderstandings he had about who we are and what we are. So finally, after all these years, we had an opportunity to come together and talk. And, I kind of straightened out, I think, his misperceptions about Walkaway. And, he apologized, which was not necessary, for having a misunderstanding in the first place. So it was more than just like a normal podcast interview. It was actually, he was actually very influential in part of my walkaway journey. And then, definitely had kind of like a place in what happened after walkaway, with some comments that he made and stuff. So it was really cool to get to talk to him.
I had no idea. So who knew that he had such a role in the beginning and, and two different kinds of roles, it sounds like.
Right.
Yeah. So many of us are connected and so for me, it was critical race theory. And I don't think you know too much about my little story, so I'll tell it to you. And it really does involve critical race theory. I think so many of us are connected by this dislike of critical race theory and its offshoots, these ideas coming from the left. So we'll talk about that. But for me, I come from a very progressive home. I got two uncles. Well, actually, unfortunately, rest in peace, Uncle John. It's gonna be sad. He overdosed recently on fentanyl. Terrible. So that actually ties into why, hey, MAGA, But I have these very progressive uncles. Uncle John was a brilliant screenwriter and very left-leaning guy. Uncle Rick was Bernie Sanders' third hire in 2016 as a speechwriter. My dad's very left-leaning. These are very well-read guys. I respect them. Always related to my dad through politics and grew up with, the news on during dinner, which probably shouldn't have been. And that's how I came up. And so I voted for Obama twice, Hillary and Joe. But being restless, at my construction management job in 2018. I got myself into law school and loved it. It was like the beginning of my awakening. Um, and the first couple of years of law school were just the core curriculum, and that nudged me to the right just ever so gently. I said, "Oh, this private property individualism system that we have, I like it. I know it's based on these principles, but I like it. It seemed pretty great." And then I got to my final year, and I decided to take two critical race theory electives because I'm my father's son, and I want to understand people's pain and all of the interest in injustice, this desire to fix the world, that kind of thing. And it was a doozy, man. The professor was brilliant, black man, went to Yale, and he had many classes with current Supreme Court justices. So he had a lot of interesting stories to tell about being there with the Clintons. And he was amazing, but the material was very controversial. Um, but the students, more than anything, were what really flipped me out. Just the anger, the resentment. And I was like, guys, we're all privileged in this room. And actually, if I back it up, it even started with the law school orientation, the implicit bias training. I go, man, I've been at it. So I was 10 years older than my peers because, that's what I did. I took 10 years off between going to school, college and law school. I said, what is this implicit bias training? Like, this is new. I don't think I'm racist, guys. I don't think I need this. And then critical race theory, the ultimate manifestation of the bias training and the identity politics that we've seen from the left for so long. So for me, it was this idea that straight white people are advantaged, and if they're not actively part of deconstructing and reconstructing what America is into making it more fair for everybody, then they're part of the problem. So I know your walkaway journey has a lot to do with this kind of mindset from the left, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a combination of things. I would say the primary thing that drove me away was the realization that the media that I'd been trusting my whole life was lying to me and deceiving and betraying me. But there was definitely a number of years leading up to my final, decision to walk away, that were based largely on like social justice issues from the left. While I was still liberal, while I still considered myself somebody who was fighting for racial injustice and LGBT rights and things like that. But, I started to see from within those own communities, the black community, I shouldn't say the black community, but like, the social justice manipulation of these communities and weaponization really of minority status. That started to really alienate me for years leading up to the final moment when I ended up leaving the left.
And the moment, if I have it right, was the debunking of the video where Trump mocked that disabled or allegedly mocked that disabled reporter. Was it that?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that was kind of it's interesting. It was neither the first thing nor was it the final straw, but it was the thing that like opened the door of my brain,
right,
that got me to see that something was not right. And then it kind of started me down this path and this journey. And that it was about 2 months after that moment that I realized I could no longer, which by the way is in retrospect very fast. I mean, when you look at the number of people, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but when I look at the number of people who are much smarter than me and much more intelligent than me who have stayed on this train of deception with the left for years and years and years, and as it's gotten to the point of, I mean, I don't even get how people aren't seeing it anymore.
I was just going to ask you,
yeah,
why? How is there still so much unwillingness to see?
Because I think that at this point, the people who are in, well, it's a number of things. The people who are in this deep for this long, number one, many of them have become addicted to rage. And so it's not even about logic or common sense anymore. It's about getting a daily fix or a multi-times daily fix of outrage. The media has turned them into junkies, and hating Donald Trump and hating his supporters gives them a dopamine rush. And so they have to keep going back every night to their dealer, which is MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, etc., to hear whatever it is that they need to hear that will confirm their biases, that they hate Trump and his supporters, because it's like, okay, good. Something new that I can be angry about. That's number one. And then number two, for both that group of people and the people who maybe are not in that deep, but, are still kind of following along. I mean, these people have gone pretty far at this point and for a long time. I mean, when you dedicate like 8 years of your life to hating Donald Trump and his supporters, to the point where you've actually probably cut people out of your life, you've probably hideously mistreated a good number of people, and you probably even at this point cheered as he was criminally indicted on bogus charges, celebrated the lawfare that is meant to try to bankrupt him on the most ridiculous allegations, and even cheered as he got shot, and other people have tried to assassinate him. I mean, at a certain point, you compromise your morality so much that by the time you realize you were wrong about everything, how do you go back at that point and be like, oh, whoops, I had that wrong? Like, how do you go back and take back that you celebrated when he got shot, and that the justice system has been so weaponized that innocent people are being rounded up and jailed, and that they're literally like bending the law inside and out to try to imprison him or destroy his life, or many of his supporters. That's a difficult thing. When you've spent years going so far down this rabbit hole that you have literally completely compromised your entire value system, it's really hard at that point, I think, to go, oh, sorry, I had that wrong. But you still should. For the record, you still should. I mean, if you're somebody watching this and you fall into that category, we will forgive you. Like, we will.
Right.
I think there has to be some recognition and atonement, but you shouldn't avoid walking away out of shame, because we actually will forgive you.
Right. No, I didn't have TDS. I never said horrible things about the guy, but I was never able to support him until Kennedy endorsed him. And I have been welcomed with such open arms. So I imagine look at JD Vance. I think they've welcomed him pretty well. So you had this awakening. I had this awakening. You set the stage. You're the model. And so you've cleared the path for a lot of us. So we got to talk about, how that feels and what that's been like. But my question is, why do both of us have this desire to spread the word and convert people? Because you certainly do, and encourage people to do the same. And for me, I never had any intention of being an advocate. But once I had this clarity and conviction 2 months ago, I said, I've been a whole new person. People don't recognize me. Vote for Trump, vote for Trump. So what is it? Why?
Well, I think that obviously I can't speak for you because I'm just getting to know you, but I would imagine you will probably agree with me about a lot of this. When you realize, when the veil is lifted and you see clearly, and you suddenly see, oh my God, all of these things that I used to believe are not true, but it's a good thing, because what you're being told and what you're being spoon-fed and brainwashed to believe is that half the country is racist and bigoted, and that the other half of the country, which is the side that exists under the umbrella of the left, is largely a lot of minority communities, racial minorities, sexual minorities, LGBT, etc. And all of these people are being told that we live in a country that's racist and bigoted, and that is designed with a system of oppression from which these minority communities cannot succeed. They can't break free. It's a very ugly story and a very ugly narrative. And when you realize that the majority of it is a mass manipulation that's used to control people, and that the bad guys are actually the good guys and the alleged good guys are actually the bad guys, it's actually sort of like this exhilarating feeling that you want to share with people. Because when I started Walk Away and when I started speaking out, I did it because legitimately, and I'm a gay man, for anybody who doesn't know, I really believed that I was going to be delivering good news to people. And, my message was essentially, hey guys, I know it's kind of devastating to realize that the Democrats are not your friends, because I loved being a Democrat. I loved the Democratic Party, and I loved being a liberal. But there's this sort of realization, as Brett Weinstein said, that, it's like the analogy of the dog, and now the dog has rabies. It's like you love the dog, but the dog has become rabid. It's not the same dog that it once was. And it can't be salvaged at this point, not in its current state. But the good news is that everything that side is telling you is not true. And if you're, worried about what it means to live under a Donald Trump administration or coexist with his supporters and followers, and, you're being told that these people want to destroy people who are non-Caucasian or who are not heterosexual, the realization that this is all not true, and that to be MAGA or to support Donald Trump means that you're supporting American exceptionalism for all people and trying to lift all people up. I mean, I thought initially that the news that I was trying to bring would be welcomed by most people. I didn't think it'd be welcomed by Democrats, leadership, or maybe the mainstream media. But I thought that most citizens who were Democrats would be relieved to find out that they are being misled, and that the good news is that you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be scared, which is what they want you to constantly be terrified and suspended in a state of fear, that so they can control you. And I was like, good news, you don't have to be afraid. But what I guess didn't anticipate was that many people do not want to be told that they're not victims, because victimhood is power. And when you go and you try to break down the facade of victimhood, you're taking, for a lot of people, their identity and their power away, and they will fight you with everything that they have. And I don't think that I fully anticipated the brutality that I was setting myself up for by doing that. But I can tell you that is the reason I think that it feels exciting to speak out. Because, first of all, it's always exciting once you're an adult, that you learn something new. I mean, you kind of get to a point in life where you think you know everything and you've kind of got it all figured out. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, the world isn't at all what I thought it was. And that is an exciting thing that you want to share with people and speak out about. But for me, the other reason was that I was hoping to bring a sense of calm and peace and relief to people who were feeling afraid.
Yeah, so much. So I wonder how you became so attuned to the vitriol coming out of the left, given that you didn't take a critical race theory class. So where was your exposure to this ideology? Because I agree with you 100%. And I hate to agree with you. I really wish I didn't. And certainly we can say, okay, if you take the best things only from critical race theory, you can say, okay, it has some value. But ultimately, no, I found it to be very divisive, very destructive, and just a cesspool of anger and hate. Completely agree with you. So where did you get exposed to this kind of stuff?
Well, that kind of rhetoric became commonplace just among the circle of friends and colleagues and coworkers. And now I was an actor and singer living in New York City, so somebody who's very involved in theater arts. I worked in restaurants mostly. I did at one point as an adult go to cosmetology school and get my license to be a hairstylist, which I did for a couple of years. But everything I did was a very liberal centric, artsy kind of field. So I didn't really know conservatives. I was pretty much only surrounded by leftists and liberals. And so that rhetoric started entering conversations probably I don't know, in the mid, the aughts, they call them, from 2000 to 2010. I know, probably around 2005, 6, 7. And then it really started to ramp up between, I'd say, 2010 and 2015, where people were constantly starting to talk about white privilege, toxic masculinity, male privilege. And I never liked it. I mean, it always hit me wrong. And it never felt productive. I can tell you, anytime anyone ever talked to me about male privilege or white privilege, it was always very venomous, very angry, vitriolic. They were always coming from a place of trying to kind of be combative and argumentative. And it never felt unifying or productive. It felt like weaponized. Yeah, exactly. And so I would argue with other liberals because, my life, I can certainly, if I were to look at the totality of my life, there are definite benefits and advantages that I've had. Very few of them have had to do with the color of my skin. They've had to do with just other attributes, I think, that I have. But in general, my life has been very, very hard from the beginning. The very beginning. I mean, I grew up gay in a small town in the 80s and 90s, a very religious, conservative small town at a time at the, I'd say, the height of homophobia in this country. It was during the AIDS crisis. I knew I was gay when I was a little kid. So I grew up always hearing very negative rhetoric about gay people, and knew that that was something that was about me, that wasn't safe, that wasn't well received by the outside world.
Right.
You know, I was bullied, at times beaten up. And then I grew up and I became an adult, and I was very, very poor. My family doesn't have money. I moved to New York City to pursue an actor's life. I mean, there were not just days, but years where I literally, the only money I had was spare change. I mean, there was many, many times when I would be searching my apartment for quarters so that I could go order food off the dollar menu at McDonald's. And this wasn't once or twice. This was weeks and weeks. And so having people tell me how privileged I am because I'm white,
right,
or because I'm a man or whatever is very aggravating to me. And then it got even worse in 2015-16, because when that was in 2015, the Supreme Court decided that marriage equality was the law of the land, and that, you know, in all 50 states, gay people had the right to get married. Now, I was a gay marriage advocate who, for me, that was pretty much the finish line. I'd always been an advocate for gay rights and equality, and you know, based off of even what I just told you, somebody who was fundamentally aware of injustice towards many gay people, especially depending on where you lived geographically or where you grew up. So none of that was lost on me, but I did think, you know, I just want the same rights under the law as other people have in this country. And so when the Supreme Court decided that, for me, I was like, okay, you know, you can't legislate tolerance or acceptance. You can't force people to like you or accept you because you're gay or anything else, but you can demand that your government treat you equally. And I felt like that was it. That was the moment. Okay, we're good. But what happened next was that the LGBT community became more angry, more divided, I'd say more authoritarian, and what is the word I'm looking for?
Oppressive, stifling,
militant. They became more militant in their pursuit of control, I think, of other people. And then what I started to hear from within my community was the gender radical ideology. So it was after 2015 that suddenly, and it was almost like it was overnight, we started to hear about gender fluid people, gender queer people, non-binary people, and this like whole spectrum of transgenderism, which had never existed up until that point. And all of those people were so nasty. So I mean, like, I'd never even seen them or heard of them in decades, but it's like they came out of nowhere overnight. And those people were the people who started preaching about gay male privilege, and that, you know, and that gay men needed to sit down and shut up because it was time for, you know, the trans part of the community to have the microphone and the megaphone and the voice. And when they started talking about gay male privilege, I was like, what in hell is going on? Because I know that as a gay, like, I witnessed and lived through friends of mine who would get gay bashed and beaten up just for walking down the streets. I have been there as that happened. I mean, I'll never forget in the late 90s coming out of a bar when a van drove up and a bunch of guys jumped out of a van and just started beating the hell out of all of the people that I was with. Now, I somehow got spared, but I was standing right there. And so I'm like, we're the privileged ones. The gay men are the privileged ones. You know, people weren't going and gay bashing lesbians and bisexual people. It was gay men who were really the brunt of homophobia. But now you've got all these little weirdos in this community who are like, I'm neither male nor female. I'm gender fluid. I'm gender queer. And they're the people who are now attacking gay men the same way that society used to attack gay men. And that's when I started to see that there was something, to again use the term sort of like rabid and toxic that was happening within liberal ideology. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but it's ugly. And I'm not cool with any of this. And that's when I started to really feel it from within.
Yeah. So getting my taste of it in those classes, coming fresh out of them, Vivek bursts onto the scene, and he's talking about, well, I've got the antidote. He says meritocracy. And so he really reached my ears. His message was welcome. And then once he started to fade a little bit from relevance, or was obviously wasn't going to be able to step out of Trump's shadow, I migrated to Kennedy. And Kennedy, who I didn't agree with everything with, for example, I'm coming out of those classes going, you know what, sorry, but I don't agree with reparations. And here he is making the argument for reparations. That's okay, though, because he was speaking in that way that we haven't heard in so long from the left: unified, leadership, visionary. So what do you think of Kennedy? Don't you agree that so much of this is tone as well?
Tone in what respect?
Well, the ideologies, even if, because I don't know the history of the trans community, and I don't know if you do either, but it sounds like you weren't familiar with them. Let me back up. Do you think these people really just popped out of nowhere? What did cause this anger and change?
Well, so that I'll make this very quick because it could be its own show, but essentially, the reason why that happened, I can't tell you who started it and who did the training, because it is the kind of thing where people had to be kind of groomed and trained to prepare for this moment. But it's a huge industry. What I call it the oppression industry. So you've got, nonprofit organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, or on the black side of it, the NAACP. For the LGBT people, it's GLAAD, it's Human Rights Campaign. It's, and these nonprofit organizations bring in tens of millions of dollars every year. And the top brass at these organizations, which, as they get bigger and bigger, it's anywhere from 20 to maybe 50 people from the top down who are making over $500,000 a year in their positions as executives at these nonprofit organizations. So they've got to bring in serious money to cover these people's salaries, because these people are making fortunes. And the only way to bring in money is to continue the narrative that minorities are oppressed. So they're highly incentivized. These people who run the Human Rights Campaign or the NAACP, they've got to keep a constant and steady drumbeat telling the public that black people are in danger, that LGBT people are in danger. So when you have something like the Supreme Court saying that marriage equality is the law of the land, you would think that if you were an LGBT person, this would be a moment of celebration. But for those people who are controlling and running the oppression industry, this is actually like a huge net negative for them, because they're like, this does not help us continue the narrative that gay people and LGBT people are in danger or they're oppressed. We've got to keep that story going. So at a certain point, they have to make up the story, because the story is no longer true. It's no longer real. And it was very clever what they did. What they did was they created a new victim class that they completely made up. And so what they did was they convinced a lot of people that they were transgender when they were not transgender. And the way they were able to do that was by expanding the definition of transgender. So now transgender no longer means that you're a person with gender dysphoria who was born male and thinks that you're a female, or was born female and thinks that you're a male. Now it's, if you're a 12-year-old who feels awkward in your body, maybe because you're overweight, or maybe you're autistic, or maybe you're shy or socially awkward, well, you're probably trans. And it's okay that you are, maybe you're a girl and you don't feel like you're a boy. That's okay. You don't have to feel like a boy anymore. You just have to feel uncomfortable and feel like, maybe you're gender fluid, or maybe you're neither male nor female. You're your own special, unique marker on the gender spectrum. And you get to call yourself trans now. And these industries get to tell people that these people are being discriminated against. I mean, for instance, this is the whole reason why they created this stupid pronoun culture, because they knew everybody would hate it. Nobody would want to engage in it or embrace it. But, if you're unwilling to call a person they, them, or z, zer, or whatever they're trying to push us to do, then they get to call that bigotry. And once they get to call that bigotry, they get to say, send money now, because the LGBTQ community is being discriminated against, and we've got to fight this discrimination. So send money now. And all of that money is going to the people who are creating these lies. So, but I don't know the process by which they used to indoctrinate people into believing that they were non-binary or gender fluid or gender queer. That all seemed to happen quietly under the surface, and then boom, all of a sudden these people just came out of nowhere. And
you would think a gay man would have some insight onto that. Maybe, I mean, maybe not, but I take
I can tell you, sorry, I can tell you that they were not hanging out at gay bars. They were not a part of gay culture. They were, I mean, whatever this training was that happened, it happened, I think, on the internet and very quietly and subtly underground. And then it was like somebody said, 1, 2, 3, charge, and that it was go time for all of these people to start lashing out. And they just, boom, they did. And it was like, it was very loud and very sudden and very to the point where I think people didn't even really know what it was or what to do. And so they just went along with it. They're like, okay. And I see gay men who are still on the left embracing this because I think they don't even understand what to do. They don't get what's going on. They're just like, oh, okay, I'm being told that I'm supposed to embrace these people as part of my community. So I do, without even really understanding what's happening.
Yeah, so you paint the picture, and I agree with you, of course, that we have this very bizarre, charged up, angry, fast-changing political, social, cultural landscape, and you walk away, you make this video, and so what happens next for you? You instantly become famous, or what?
Yes, I pretty much.
So what's that like, and what happens next?
Yeah, so I put the video out on May 26th of 2018. At the time that I put I created a 6-minute video talking about all the reasons why I was walking away from liberalism and the Democratic Party. And I had no following. I think I literally had like 40 followers on Twitter. I created a Facebook page. So I had a Facebook account for myself, like most people do. But I knew that people who had been my friends up until that point, who mostly, I lost like 90% of my friends when I started speaking out about leaving the left. And so kind of for my own self-protection, I created a page that was just called Brandon Straka. And it was a page that I created just so I could start creating political content that people wouldn't have to see on my personal Facebook page, because I knew that most of the people who were still following me, which was not that many because most of them had unfollowed me, but I just got sick and tired of being attacked for speaking the truth about what I believed. So I created a public page called Brandon Straka, and it had like no followers. And I put this video out, and I had this idea to create a community because I had such a hard time. I lost most of my friends. My life got turned upside down, and I didn't have a network of support of other people who had had this experience of having their lives turned upside down by suddenly kind of reversing their thinking on almost everything they ever believed, right, and having this red pill moment, this awakening. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we created a community where people could come together and support each other as they are having this experience of waking up to the truth about the left and the left-wing media and the Democrats. And so I created a Facebook group called #WalkAwayCampaign, and I put the video out, and I launched the Facebook group. And within a week or 2 weeks, the video started to go viral. People were just sharing it and sharing it. And then in the first few weeks, I started getting invited to go on like small podcasts and little, like AM radio stations, regional radio stations. And I was like super stoked. I couldn't believe that anybody cared about anything I had to say. So I said yes to everything. I mean, there was literally nothing I said no to. And it got to the point between, I'd say, the second and the fifth week where I was getting invited to go on about 9 to 12 interviews a day, between radio stations and podcasts, and I, not major podcasts. I mean, I was going on stuff where, the person had like 40, subscribers, and what, I didn't care. I just, like, if anyone wanted to hear my idea, I just said yes. And so between weeks 2 and 5, I did every podcast, every radio interview, anybody who asked me for an interview, I said yes. And I was doing about 9 to 12 of those a day. And then they started to get a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger. And then finally, on the 5th week, I got contacted by the Tucker Carlson show.
Wow.
And they asked me to come on Tucker to talk about my video and talk about Walkaway. Of course, I said yes. So I went on that night, and then the next night I got asked to go on the Laura Ingraham show. And then the day after that, I got asked to go on the Charles Payne show on Fox. And then the day after that, I got asked to go on Fox and Friends. And then the day after that, I got asked to go on Judge Jeanine. So that week I did Fox News 5 days in a row. And by that point, it just, like, boom, it was just like Walkaway mania. And then that's what really just catapulted me, like, out of a slingshot. And then the rest is kind of history. At that point, we became a national movement. We by the end of that week, I think about 100,000 people had joined Walkaway. We started getting testimonials by the hundreds. And then I'd say by the end of that first year, we had thousands of Walkaway stories.
So is the next chapter in the story this January 6th business, which I don't even know that much about, but I'd love to get your take on what happened in your perspective.
Well, I would say that there's several chapters in between, but probably the most relevant chapter would be that when Walkaway started to really grow and succeed in 2018, then the left-wing media became very threatened by it. So they created this narrative that Walkaway was a Russian disinformation campaign. And they started to, I mean, it was everywhere. CNN, Washington Post, like, everyone was doing articles saying that Walkaway wasn't real, that it was created by Vladimir Putin, that it was all Russian bots and Russian propaganda. And it just became this huge thing. And so my team and I, because at that point I had assembled a volunteer team to help kind of grow the mission and grow the movement. We were like, what are we going to do about this? And so I came up with this idea that we would try to do a march on Washington. And so I announced in the summer of 2018, I was like, okay, well, if they're going to say that we're not real and none of us are real people telling real stories, I'm going to ask everyone to come to Washington, D.C. if you can on October, I think 18th. And let's do a march on Washington and show them and it was a really ballsy thing to do, because first of all, I'd never done anything like it before. Second of all, I had no idea if anybody would show up. And so, I mean, I was really setting myself up to look like a fool if, the media was saying this was a Russian propaganda campaign. And then I go there and I'm the only one marching around with a Walkaway sign. But I took a leap of faith and I announced that. And then thousands of people came from all over the country. And we had this massive march on Washington in October of 2018. And what that showed me was that this was a real movement and a real real world, not just on the internet, not just a social media thing, but there was, a real world impact on what we were doing. And so that we needed to do more of this. And so on January 1st of 2019, I launched our organization, the Walkaway Foundation, which is our official organization in which we raise money and we go around the country doing events, going into the Black community, Hispanic community, LGBT community, college campuses. And we're not just for minorities. I put an extra focus on minorities because I think minority communities are being the most lied to and exploited and deceived. But Walkaway is a movement for all people: white, Black, brown, straight, gay, old, young. And so we do live events. We do town halls, debates, rallies, marches, college campus tours. We create educational video content, and all of this through the Walkaway organization. And so the organization has now been around for 5 or 6 years. And Somehow we survived everything that's happened post January 6th. But to date, Walkaway has traveled to over 100 cities around the country. We have done, I can't even count, dozens and dozens and dozens of events. Again, rallies, marches, college tours, minority town halls, debates. I say that we are the hardest working political movement in the business, and we are, and we certainly don't always get the recognition that we deserve, or I think the acknowledgement for the impact that we've had to help the Trump campaign succeed, to help the Republican Party succeed. And we're not a Republican organization, we're not a Trump organization, but certainly the work that we do helps those people. But we bust our ass and we work really hard, and we've been very, very successful, and we've overcome a lot. We've been more targeted than any organization, I think, in conservative political history. But we keep fighting because we're tough and we're resilient and we believe in what we're doing.
Awesome. So I'm not that particularly interested, like I said, in the January 6th story, but do you want to say anything about that? Or do you want to just, is there anything, what would you say?
Well,
because all I know is what you got charged with something and you're on probation. That's all I know.
Right. Well, so in a nutshell, so I was asked to be a speaker on January 6th at a second event that was going to take place. So the first event was President Trump speaking at the Ellipse with a number of other speakers. And then it was always supposed to be a march from the Ellipse to the Capitol. There was a stage set up on Capitol grounds, and a second event that was going to happen at the Capitol with dozens of speakers, and I was one of them. So as I was arriving on Capitol grounds to do my speaking engagement, I started getting told that people were going inside the building. So I started shooting a video, and I approached the building to try to kind of investigate what was going on, because I knew that the media cannot be trusted.
Right.
And I also didn't know what was happening. I was only getting text messages from friends and family around the country who were watching on television saying something was going on and people were going in the building. And so I approached the building on the east side. When I got there, the doors to the Capitol were open. I never entered the Capitol on January 6th. I didn't get within 35 feet of entering the Capitol. I did not witness any violence, vandalism, theft, or destruction, nor did I commit any. No one around me was rioting. No one around me was breaking windows. Nothing that you saw happening on the west side of the building was happening on the east side of the building where I was when I was there. But I stood outside the building for 8 minutes shooting a video. The doors were open. There was a crowd of people. Some of them were trying to push their way in. The majority of people like me were standing outside shooting a video. I stopped shooting after 8 minutes because a man came out of the building. He got on a bullhorn. He said, "They've cleared Congress. Everybody left the building. Move out, move out." And I immediately turned around, walked down the stairs, and I left. And I uploaded that video to Twitter. And 2.5 weeks later, the FBI raided my house. Got me out of bed, put me in handcuffs, took me to jail. I sat in jail for 2.5 days. And when I got out, I learned that I was facing multiple felony charges by the government. The government made now, bear in mind, at this point, Joe Biden had just become president. The Democrats had taken full control of Congress, both the House and the Senate. And I'm Brandon Straka, the guy who spent the last 2.5 years prior trying to tell everyone in the country to leave the Democratic Party. And so the government made very clear in my charging documents that they were showing a special interest in me because I was the founder of the Walkaway campaign, because I was a person, as they put it, with influence, that people were listening to, that did events that people were showing up for, and that for me to go to the Capitol or to challenge the 2020 election was particularly egregious because I have a large following and I'm a person of influence, and that I needed to be taught a lesson because of that. So they hit me with a bunch of absolutely ridiculous charges. I would argue for things that aren't even crimes, but and also that I didn't do. But even if I did do them, I don't know how they would be considered crimes. But basically, you know, they put people in a position where they overcharge them to the point where they have to take a plea deal, because you're only, and by the way, that you know, they're only holding these January 6th hearings in Washington D.C. They won't release jurisdiction of any of these cases. So you have to go before a DC judge and a DC jury that voted 93% against Donald Trump. They hate Donald Trump and his supporters. They've gotten a 100% conviction rate on these January 6 trials. So every person who goes to trial is going to be found guilty in DC. 100%. It's going to happen. So my options were to fight the charges against a biased jury that's going to convict you on multiple felonies, and I'm probably going to go to prison for 2 or 3 years on ridiculous charges, or take a plea deal and plead guilty to a misdemeanor. And that's what I did. And because I pled guilty to a misdemeanor, that gave the corrupt media exactly the ammunition that they needed to say that I was a part of the January 6th insurrection, that I was a rioter on January 6th. And then they went on further to say that the only reason why I got off easy is because I became an FBI informant and turned people in for January 6th, which was not true at all. I mean, literally no truth to that whatsoever, with the exception of one individual whose identity I discovered in the crowd, who is a convicted child rapist. He raped a 10-year-old girl, and I provided his identity, and they never showed any interest in going after him, which was very, very interesting. Because I found out his identity because somebody contacted me and told me, and they told me that they believed that he was either an FBI human source, or that he was Antifa. And so I did report him, and they never showed any interest in arresting him, charging him, talking to him. But that was it. But so they did everything that they possibly could to destroy my name and reputation. And then in addition, Walkaway, who was completely innocent. I would also argue that I was innocent. But Walkaway had nothing to do. I mean, I was there as a private citizen. But because I pled guilty to a misdemeanor for disorderly conduct, that was used as an excuse to ban me and Walkaway permanently by banks, payment processors, email services. I mean, we got deplatformed from everything. And we also lost our Facebook group, which at that point had grown to over 500,000 people had joined Walkaway and shared their Walkaway stories, Walkaway videos, and they deleted all of that content, the entire group, everything. So, I mean, it was an annihilation, absolute annihilation, and over nothing. I mean, over standing outside of the Capitol non-violently for 8 minutes shooting a video.
Right. As a layman who just watches the news, should I be seriously suspicious about the coverage of that event then, in general?
Yeah, you have to be, because even the people who are on the other side of the building, who are charged with rioting and assaulting police officers and breaking windows and things like that, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that nobody did anything wrong, because number one, I wasn't on that side of the building. I wasn't there. But I do know now, and I also, just like the Hunter Biden laptop story or anything else, that they actively work to conceal and deceive people. Most people don't know that the reason why agitation and violence broke out on January 6th is because the police started throwing explosives into the crowd when the crowd was just standing there. So you had a huge mass of thousands of people standing behind barricades on January 6th, and the police started throwing flashbangs into the crowd that started exploding, and people were getting hurt. I mean, there's images of people who have, one guy, it blew a hole in his cheek.
Right.
And when they started doing that, that's when the crowd became just unmanageable, and people got really agitated and started surging forward, and then that's when the violence began. And most people don't know that. Now, does that excuse every person who broke a window or whatever? Of course not. Of course not. And I'm sure that there were definitely people who should not have put their hands on a police officer, who did. And the only reason I say should not is because many instances, the police instigated the aggression and people were defending themselves, but the government doesn't care. If there's any footage or anything where they could see a person putting their hands on a police officer, they don't care if the police officer put their hands on the person first. They just are charging that person with assaulting an officer, even if they were defending themselves. So there were instances where people were defending themselves, and then there were instances where people were not. But no, the narrative of January 6th is ridiculous. No.
Well, it sounds messy and unfortunate. It's such a shame. Here you are. It must have been so surreal because I'm sure you have the best intentions. I assume you had love in your heart and just this passion that drove you to do this. And then here you are. You have this incredible fame and success, and everything must have been going great. And then you get the pendulum swings. That must have been surreal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it continues to be surreal. And it's I learned, I think, the hardest possible lessons in the most brutal of ways. I mean, because to your point, up until I got arrested, I never would have dreamed that I was somebody that people wouldn't overwhelmingly stand up for if something happened, because I'd had so much success. I was doing so many events. I was so well known. And, Fox News used to have me on all the time. And, we were doing all these events where people would, come in droves and stuff. And when I got arrested, it was like silence, like radio silent. And that has certainly improved because I worked so hard for so many years to get my story out and to utilize the media that would talk to me when so much of the media wouldn't. But it was very shocking to find out that I would say the majority of the right-wing influencers still have never talked about what happened to me, mentioned a word about my arrest or anything else. A lot, Fox News has never talked about what happened to me other than Tucker. But he doesn't work for Fox anymore. But Tucker was the only one who had me on after January 6th repeatedly to talk about what happened to me and share my story. So I learned this really hard lesson about kind of the fair weather friend reality of what it means to be on the right. And I mean, I would caution and urge someone like you to be aware of that too, because I know how intoxicating it can be when you get really excited about, having the veil lifted and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, MAGA, 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 Trump,
welcome,
Trump.
brother. You're one of us.
Woo, woo, woo. And it's a great feeling and it's an overwhelming feeling, but just know that, when the chips are down, a lot of those same people cheering you on right now they're going to whistle and walk the other direction. So no, let me do you that favor and let you know that right now, because things are not always what they seem.
No, I appreciate it. It's one of the reasons I thought it would be so interesting to talk to you. So that leads into where I was going next, which is, what have you learned in your travels? That must be one of them. What else have you learned in this time, last 6 years?
Oh my God.
About yourself or about the country?
Yeah, so much. Man, I learned that Republicans are not, at least anymore, what I thought that they were. I learned that the majority of Republicans are loving and open-minded and very tolerant, and many of them at this point recognize that they have gay children and grandchildren and coworkers and neighbors, and this whole issue of gay rights and being in a gay person in society. It's we just really don't have trouble anymore, I think, with the conservative side of the aisle. And that's been a real blessing, I think, to realize. And, I've traveled the country now. I've literally done hundreds and hundreds of speaking engagements in just about every state in the nation for so many different Republican clubs, big and small and everything in between. And it's been such an incredible blessing to get to know the people of this country all across the country who identify as conservatives and America First and MAGA people. I love them. They're my heart. And it's been amazing. I learned, I learned to be very cautious about who your friends are. And when you find out who your friends are, keep those people close and never forget the people who didn't have your back when you really needed it. Those people are not to be trusted. I think I learned that when you should always tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient to do so. I certainly did that as a walk away, a person leaving the left. But now I find myself in this position that I want to get through this election in 1 week and not muddy any waters until then. But I think after the election, I have to start telling the truth about a lot of people on the right too, because there are a lot of people who have become folk heroes on the right that people don't really know the full truth about. They don't know the truth about their integrity, their character, and the kind of people that they actually are. And I do, because of what I went through. And so I think I'm about to go through this second wave of becoming very unpopular with a lot of people. But I have to remind myself, like, why did you become well known in the first place, and why are you who you are? It's not because you were a MAGA spokesperson or whatever. It's because you told the truth. And I think that my personal brand, that's my personal brand, is telling the truth at all costs.
Right.
And even if that means telling the truth about people on your own side. So I don't know. There's we could go on and on and on about what I've learned, and I continue to learn. I mean, that's probably the ultimate lesson, that the journey never ends. You every day continue to learn. You never get to the end. You never get to a point where you're like, I'm done. I learned everything. You just have to keep that channel open and keep learning every day.
It's such a perfect answer, because I have a couple just very quick hits to ask you to end with, and you really touched upon a few of them. I really don't need to ask them. I was going to ask what's next, so I think I know what's next. And that ties into another quick hitter I had, which was, I'm correct, am I not, in saying that your movement was always walking away from the toxicity of the left, not necessarily towards MAGA, or it just happens to be that MAGA didn't have that same toxicity? I think that's fair, right?
I think that's totally fair. Yeah. I would say, we always say, from day one, I've had a motto for Walkaway, which is, Walkaway is a journey, not a destination. And what we mean by that is that everybody has to go on their own journey of truth, of self-discovery and revelation. We want people to do their own homework, do their own research, think for yourself, break free from identity politics, the hive mind, tribalism, all of these things on the left, that where they want to make you a part of the collective. Walk away from collectivism. I mean, that's a big part of it too. And so if your personal journey of truth and exploration leads you to become an independent, or a libertarian, or an RFK Jr. supporter, or a Tulsi Gabbard supporter, or a Trump supporter, or any other, we don't really care. We're there to support each other, learn from each other, because it's all about the journey. That there is no destination. There is no, this is where you end up when you join Walkaway. You don't, MAGA is not the destination. Trump is not the destination. Your destination is your destination, wherever that is. It's all about the journey. And so, yes, we are very open and tolerant and diverse, and we're all about learning from one another and supporting one another. And I'll add one more thing, because you said, what's next? What's next is that I just continue to fight, every day. And I will say at this point, I have kind of given up on this notion that my life could one day be the same as it was before January 6th, because I did spend a lot of years believing that if I just worked hard enough and fought and stayed in the game and worked, that I could reclaim what my life was before January 6th. I don't believe at this point it will ever happen. That's not to say that maybe I couldn't have a better life, or I could have more at some point. But I'll never be the person I once was, and I'll never have what I once had. But I think at this point, I'm not being called upon necessarily to just thrive in the way that I was thriving before. I think I'm being called upon to just stay in the fight. I think that is my role, is to just keep fighting, whether people are supporting me or not. And so that's what I'm going to do. We're going to continue to do our events. We're going to continue to go to colleges. We're going to continue to do our town halls, rallies, marches. We're going to continue to make educational videos. We're going to continue to try to get people to join the movement and share their walkaway stories. And that's my role right now. Stay in the fight and try to reach as many people as I possibly can. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, I appreciate it so much. And that's what I've done with searching for political identity. It's like, okay, what do I say? I voted for Trump. I realized that I couldn't vote for Harris, just doesn't make sense for too many reasons, but it doesn't mean I'm MAGA now or I'm a Republican. So I totally appreciate for so many reasons. Last two very quick questions, 30 seconds each. Well, this is a hard one, so maybe you can't do it in 30 seconds. Was it worth it, Brandon? If you could go back, would you still make that video?
Oh my God, 100%. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, even with everything that happened after January 6th, the 2.5 years leading up to January 6th were far and away the greatest years of my life. I mean, like, I can't even articulate like the blessings and the amazing experiences that I never dreamed I would have. And those 2.5 years will they'll just like shine like gold on the timeline of my life forever. And even after January 6th, I think knowing the way that I have impacted other people, I every single day I hear from people who say, I walked away because of you, or you opened my eyes, or this movement is what gave me the courage to finally leave the Democrats. All of that is so worth every brutal, torturous thing I've had to go through, because that's why I did it in the first place, because I wanted to bring enlightenment, freedom, and opportunity to people who were being brainwashed, enslaved, and exploited and deceived. And to know that people have walked away because of this and that I had to pay that price, to me, it's worth it.
You've played a big role, man. I can't say that I walked away because of you, but you certainly were this force, this entity that I knew of, and it did not hurt. And so it means a lot. I know what on a smaller scale now, to what it's like to be ostracized, to be called names. It's interesting. And so it's comforting. And so I really appreciate all the work you've done, man. Very last question. Do you think Trump is going to win?
Yes.
Okay.
I do. I think it's looking really good. I think more Republicans than ever are getting out in early voting right now. The message, I think, has gotten out that we're not safe to just vote on election day. I voted yesterday. I had to wait in line for 2.5 hours,
Wow.
which has never happened before. And I know that the people that I interacted with in line were all voting for Trump. So I think we're in good shape.
Right. Well, listen, man, I appreciate so much your time. It means a lot. I admire you. I respect you, and looking forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you, Brian. And I want to congratulate you on your own awakening and your decision to walk away, and tell you how much I appreciate and respect that you did that. I know what it takes and what the cost can be. And I really admire you for doing it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to learn. A lot of lessons can be taken away, not only from what you've told me, but from what you've been through. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.